Okay, so my name's Alex, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the science behind testing for the coronavirus. So let me just get my PowerPoint up.
We've got your holiday photos, which is nice.
Okay. Can you see my screen fine?
Yes, good, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Right, so today I'm going to talk to you about the science behind testing for the coronavirus. And I've tried to make this as accessible as possible, but if there's anything that you don't understand, then there'll be time for questions at the end. So we have 8 slides to run through, and these are just short topics. Each is only a slide long, so it shouldn't take longer than 10 minutes. To start off with, we're going to talk about what happens when you actually get tested. So a lot of you may have already had a test, but this is just a quick run through of the events that happen once you get to a test center. So once you arrive, a member of staff will guide you in, whether it's a walk-in or a drive-through. And the test is usually a self-test. So this means that you'll carry out the test yourself under guidance from one of the members of staff. You can also order a home test kit, or you can arrange for a private organization such as Boots to carry out the test for you if you're unable to do it yourself. So these are just 2 images of a walk-in and a drive-through test center. So the actual test itself, what you do is you take a swab and you place it lightly on your tonsils in the back of your throat for 10 seconds. You remove it and then place it in the entrance of your nose for another 10 seconds. Once you've done this, you package up the test and you drop it off in a special medical box where it's collected by Special Royal Mail Service and taken to one of several labs across the country where it can be analysed. So what is the test actually looking for? Well, your body's made up of tiny building blocks called cells. And when you're infected with the coronavirus, it essentially means the virus is living in some of these cells. So these cells can then be picked up by the swab and analysed in the lab to give you a positive result. The virus itself is really small, so that means in order to detect it, we need to carry out a complicated process to increase the level of virus in the sample so that we can essentially see it. Because if we don't do that, then the sample is too small to detect. So the virus is copied many times, and then you'll be able to be told whether you're positive or negative for the virus. This is known as PCR testing, and it's the most common and widely used type of test. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction, and it's essentially just a process in which the virus is copied many, many times in order to be detected. So I'm now going to talk to you about the rapid COVID-19 test, which is also known as the lateral flow test. And you may have heard about this as it's being rolled out across the country at the moment in order to allow university students to go home for Christmas, and it's also being used in care homes. So this type of test can give you results in as little as 15 to 30 minutes. And the key difference between this one and the PCR test is that this doesn't need to be sent to a lab. A swab is taken in exactly the same way as the PCR test, but instead of being sent to the lab, it is placed on a test strip that looks very similar to a pregnancy test. And a line will appear if you're positive. So this is just an example of how the test works. So the analyte is also known as your swab sample that you take, and you place it on the sample pad. And once you leave it for 15 to 30 minutes, essentially what happens is the sample runs up the test strip, and if the virus is present, it's going to bind to the test line and cause a color change, and a line appears telling you that you're positive. So you may have also heard of the antibody test, and the antibody test is a test for past infection. Antibodies are naturally produced by your body in response to infection, and they protect you from getting sick. If the antibody test is positive, it suggests that you've had the coronavirus previously. It doesn't mean you're immune, and it's not known how long these antibodies stay in the blood and protect you for. It also does not mean that you cannot spread the virus to other people. At the moment, the only use of this test in the UK is answering the question of whether someone has had the virus before, and it also provides the government data on the spread of the virus. So here's just a picture of what the test actually looks like. And here's a comparison slide between the swab test and the antibody test. So the key differences to take away from this is that the swab test is obviously a swab, whereas the antibody test is a blood test. The antibody test is a test for past infection, and the swab test is a test for current infection. And the antibody test takes much shorter to analyze. So I'm now going to talk to you about the accuracy of these tests, because this is something that frequently comes up in the media. So to start off with, no test can ever be 100% accurate. This is because there's simply too many variables that come into play that can affect whether the test will be accurate or not. And there's limitations for all types of coronavirus tests. And they all have different rates of false positives and false negatives, which are really hard to work out, but what actually are they? Well, a false positive is essentially when the test tells you that you have the virus, but you don't actually have it. And this number is actually quite low, and it's not usually harmful because it will essentially just mean that you self-isolate even though you don't have the virus, which isn't going to cause anyone any harm. A false negative, on the other hand, is something we want to avoid. And this is when the test tells you that you don't have the virus, but you actually do have it. And the problem with this is that you can go out into the community and unknowingly spread the virus. Concerns are being raised about the accuracy of some types of tests, such as the rapid COVID-19 tests, which some reports say only picks up about 5 out of 10 true positives. So the important message here is that if you have strong symptoms of COVID, you need to assume that you have it, even if your test is negative. So I'm now going to talk to you about 3 myths about the coronavirus test. So one myth is that it will take ages to get a test, and if you do get one, you'll have to travel miles to get it taken. Well, a few months ago, this was true for some people, and there were reports of people having to drive up to 70 miles to get a coronavirus test. But this is no longer the case, as the testing capacity has really been ramped up. And in Sheffield alone, there's currently 6 test sites. So it should be really easy to get a test if you need one. The second myth is that the test is painful. When the test is carried out correctly, it may feel a bit uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be painful. The swab doesn't go all the way to the back of the throat, and it only goes about 2 or 3 centimeters into the nose. Our third myth is that if you've been exposed to COVID-19, but you've now tested negative, you can cut short your self-isolation period. Well, this isn't true. A negative test result doesn't mean you can end your self-isolation period if you've had an exposure. For example, if you live with someone who's tested positive, or if you've been told to self-isolate by the NHS app. This is because the test can't say with 100% accuracy that you do not have the virus. For example, if you're tested too soon after being exposed to the virus, you're more likely to test negative, even if you do end up developing symptoms. That is it about coronavirus testing. If there's any questions, please let me know.